Hey, my name is Dean. I'm 31 years old, and I live in a small rented house about 4 miles outside of Harlan, Kentucky, on a road that doesn't have a name anyone remembers. I restore furniture for a living. Old chairs mostly. Dining tables with water rings baked into the finish. Church pews that somebody's grandmother donated when the congregation moved to a new building. Rocking chairs with one runner worn flat from decades of someone sitting in the same spot, pushing off the same patch of porch floor. I work out of a shop behind my house, used to be a 2-car garage. But I pulled out the door on one side and put in a workbench and a dust collection system I built from a shop vacuum and some PVC pipe. It's not fancy. The light is good in the mornings when the sun comes through the east-facing window. And by afternoon, I've got 2 clamp lamps and a radio tuned to whatever comes in clear, which is usually country or static. My days go like this. I wake up around 6, make coffee in a percolator that belonged to my mother, check my phone for messages I already know aren't there, walk out to the shop, and start sanding. I sand until lunch. I eat a sandwich standing up because I've never gotten around to putting a chair in the shop that isn't half stripped or drying. After lunch, I do staining, gluing, recaning, whatever the current piece needs. Around 5, I clean up, drive into town, eat dinner at May's Diner on Main Street, drive home, watch something I won't remember on my laptop, and go to bed. I've done this every day for 3 years. The routine isn't something I chose so much as something that filled in around me, the way sawdust fills the cracks in a workshop floor, slowly, without anyone noticing, until it's just the surface you walk on. I'm not unhappy. I want to be clear about that. I've got work I understand, a house that's warm in winter, and a truck that starts every morning. I don't sit around feeling sorry for myself. But there's a specific kind of quiet that happens when you eat dinner alone at a counter every single night and the waitress knows your order before you sit down. It's not loneliness exactly. It's more like you've become furniture yourself. Reliable, stationary, part of the room. People know where to find you. Nobody thinks to ask how you're doing because you're always doing the same thing. 2 years ago, a woman named Caroline told me she couldn't keep waiting for me to want more than what I had. She said it in the parking lot of the grocery store on a Sunday afternoon, holding a bag of oranges, crying in a way that was quiet and angry at the same time. She said, "Dean, I have been sitting in that house with you for 14 months, and I still don't know if you'd notice if I left." I told her I would notice. She said, "Then why don't you ever act like it?" I didn't have an answer. She put the oranges in her car and drove to her sister's place in Lexington, and I never saw her again. I deserved that. I know I deserved it. I just didn't know how to be any different. And by the time I understood what she was actually asking me, she was already gone. So now I restore chairs. I take broken things and I make them hold weight again. There's a kind of logic to it that I trust more than I trust the logic of people. A loose joint needs glue and a clamp in 24 hours. A cracked spindle can be doweled and reinforced. You can strip 100 years of paint off a piece of oak and find out it was beautiful the whole time, just buried. Every chair I fix is a small proof that damage isn't permanent. I find that reassuring in a way I don't think about too carefully. Every evening at May's, I sit on the same stool, third from the end of the counter, the one closest to the window. It's not the best seat. The vinyl is cracked on the left side, and the footrest is loose. But I've been sitting there so long that the stool feels like mine the way a tool feels like yours after enough hours in your hand. May keeps my coffee cup behind the counter, the blue one with the chipped rim, because she says nobody else wants it, and I'm the only customer stubborn enough to drink from a cup that might cut his lip. That Tuesday night in October, it was raining hard enough that the gutters on Main Street were overflowing, and the neon in May's window was smeared across the wet sidewalk like melted candy. I was on my stool, halfway through a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, reading nothing on my phone, when the door opened and let in a gust of cold air, and a woman I had never seen before. She was maybe 27, 28. Brown hair dark with rain and stuck to the sides of her neck. A canvas jacket that had soaked through to the shoulders. One hand holding a duffel bag by its broken strap. The other pushing wet hair out of her eyes with the kind of impatient gesture that told me she'd been doing it for hours. Her boots were muddy up past the ankles. She looked like someone who had been walking in the rain longer than anyone should have to. She scanned the diner. Every booth was taken. Tuesday was meatloaf night, and May's Meatloaf brought in people from 2 towns over. The only open seat at the counter was the one directly to my left. She walked toward it, set her bag on the floor, and started to sit down. "That seat's taken," I said. It came out before I thought about it. The seat wasn't taken. It hadn't been taken in months. The last person who sat there regularly was old Bert Calloway, and Bert had moved to a care facility in Frankfurt back in the spring. But the words came out of my mouth the way a hand comes up to block a bright light. Automatic, defensive, not something I decided to do. She stopped, one hand on the counter, half lowered toward the stool. She looked at me. Not angry, not embarrassed. She looked at me the way you look at a closed sign on a door you really needed to be open. Then she straightened up, adjusted the broken strap on her bag, and said, "Then save it for me tonight." She walked to the far end of the counter where May had just cleared a spot, and sat down without looking back. May brought her coffee without being asked, and I watched her wrap both hands around the mug like it was the warmest thing she'd touched in days. I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth, feeling like the kind of man who boards up a perfectly good window and then complains about the dark. May came by to refill my coffee and leaned close enough that only I could hear. "That girl walked in from the rain, Dean, and you told her the empty seat next to you was taken." She shook her head once, slowly, the way she does when she's not mad, but disappointed, which is worse. "Your mother would have smacked the back of your head." She would have. My mother would have smacked me, and then made the girl a plate and asked where she was staying and whether she needed a ride somewhere dry. My mother understood that an empty seat is not a thing you protect. It's a thing you offer. I had forgotten that, or maybe I had never learned it as well as I thought. I finished my meatloaf. I paid. I left my usual tip plus an extra $5, which was my way of apologizing to May for being the kind of man who tells a soaking wet stranger there's no room when there clearly is. I drove home in the rain and sat in my truck in the driveway for a few minutes, engine off, wipers stopped, water running down the windshield in uneven lines. Save it for me tonight. Like she already knew she'd be back. Like she was giving me a second chance I hadn't earned yet. The next evening I was on my stool at the usual time. She walked in at 6:15. Same canvas jacket, dry this time. Same duffel bag, strap knotted where it had broken. Hair pulled back in a low ponytail that was already coming loose on one side. She saw me, saw the empty stool beside me, and walked straight to it. "This seat still taken?" she asked. "No," I said. I was saving it. She sat down. May brought her a menu and gave me a look over the woman's head that I interpreted as either approval or a warning. With May, those are sometimes the same thing. Her name was Nora. She told me that between ordering the soup and receiving the soup, like it was the least interesting fact about herself. She was 28. She had driven to Harlan from Knoxville that week and was staying at the motel on Route 38, the one with the broken ice machine and the curtains that didn't close all the way. She said this without self-pity, the way you describe the weather, just facts about the conditions she was currently operating in. I asked her what brought her to Harlan. She said she was looking for a building her aunt had left her, a storefront on 2nd Street that had been closed up for about 6 years. She wanted to open it again. She didn't say as what. What was it before? I asked. A bookshop, she said. My aunt ran it for 22 years. She could tell you what someone needed to read just by looking at them. She never got it wrong. Not once. That's a talent. It's an extinct one, Nora said, and stirred her soup like she was thinking about something she wasn't going to tell me yet. We didn't talk much more that first night. She ate. I ate. May refilled our coffees twice. When Nora left, she said, "Good night, Dean," even though I hadn't told her my name, which meant May had. At the door, she turned back and said, "Same time tomorrow?" I nodded. She left. The bell above the door swung once, twice, and went still. She came back every night that week. By Thursday, I'd stopped pretending I wasn't saving the seat. I just was. I'd get there at 5:30, order my coffee, and leave the stool empty beside me. And when she walked in, I'd nod, and she'd sit and we'd eat together. We talked about small things at first. The rain, the state of the roads, the particular way May's pie crust shattered when you pressed a fork into it. Nora had opinions about pie crust. She had opinions about most things, delivered with a straight face and a tone so dry you had to wait a beat to realize she was being funny. On Friday, she asked me what I did for a living, and I told her about the furniture. She asked questions I didn't expect. Not what kind of furniture, but what kind of damage. What's the worst thing you've had to fix? What's the piece you couldn't save? I told her about a rocking chair that came in split clean down the back, and how I'd spent 2 weeks laminating and clamping it together only to realize the wood had dried too far and would never hold a person's weight again. I turned it into a plant stand. It holds a fern now, in the corner of my shop. "So you gave it a new job," she said. I gave it a job it could actually do. She looked at me for a second longer than the conversation required, and then she went back to her soup. On Saturday morning, she knocked on my shop door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it, holding a sanding block and wearing a respirator pushed up onto my forehead. And she was standing there in the early light, with 2 coffees from the gas station and a look on her face like she had made a decision she wasn't entirely comfortable with yet. "I need help," she said. "The building on 2nd Street. I went inside yesterday and there's a lot of work. The shelves are falling apart, the floor is warped near the back wall. There are 4 tables in there that might be salvageable if someone who knows wood looked at them. I can't afford to hire a contractor." "You're asking me?" "I'm asking the man who turned a broken rocking chair into a plant stand. That seems like the right skill set." I almost said no. I had 3 commissions waiting, a set of dining chairs for a couple in Middlesbrough, a church pew for a pastor in Evarts, a vanity table for someone's mother's birthday. I didn't have time to take on a building full of rotting shelves for a woman I'd known less than a week. I was tired. I had my own obligations. My schedule was built the way I'd built it, tight, self-contained, no room for variables. But she was standing in the doorway with gas station coffee, and her ponytail was already coming loose. And behind the directness in her voice, there was something careful, something that had rehearsed this request on the drive over and was fully prepared for me to say no, and had a plan for what to do next that probably involved a YouTube tutorial and a borrowed hammer. "Let me see the building first," I said. The place on 2nd Street was worse than she'd described, and she hadn't described it gently. It was a narrow storefront with a pressed tin ceiling gone green with moisture, wooden floors that buckled near the back where a pipe had leaked for probably a year, and shelves that had been beautiful once. Solid walnut, hand-fitted, the kind of joinery you don't see anymore, but had warped and split from 6 years of neglect and damp. The 4 tables she mentioned were buried under drop cloths and mouse droppings. I pulled one cloth back and ran my hand across the surface. Quarter sawn oak, dovetail joints. Whoever built these tables knew exactly what they were doing. "Your aunt had good furniture," I said. "My aunt had good taste in everything," Nora said. "Furniture, books, people. She was very specific about quality." "These tables are worth saving." "I know. That's why I asked you." I started working on the building the following Monday. Mornings in my own shop on the commissions, afternoons on 2nd Street. Nora was there every afternoon when I arrived. I expected her to watch. She didn't watch. She worked. She pulled up damaged floorboards with a pry bar and a steadiness that told me she'd done physical labor before, even if her hands were blistered raw by the 2nd day. She sorted through boxes of her aunt's old inventory, water-damaged books, papers, receipts going back decades, with the kind of quiet attention that made it clear she was not just cleaning. She was remembering. On the 3rd day, I was rebuilding a shelf bracket, and she was across the room sanding a window frame. And without looking up, she said, "You've got the grain direction wrong on that bracket." I stopped, looked at it. She was right. I had the bracket-oriented cross grain, which meant it would split under load within a year. She didn't say it like she was correcting me. She said it like she was reading a fact off a page. "How do you know about grain direction?" I asked. "My aunt taught me. She said if you're going to own a building full of wooden shelves, you should understand wood. So she taught me. Grain, joinery, seasonal expansion. I was 12. I turned the bracket, remarked it, and started over. She went back to her window frame. We didn't say anything else for an hour, and the quiet was the good kind, the kind that means 2 people are working and neither one needs to fill the air with sound to prove the other one is still there. Over the next 2 weeks, the rhythm settled in like a joint finding its seat. I would arrive at 1 and she would already be there, usually up on a stepladder doing something she probably shouldn't have been doing alone. She never asked for help with the tasks she could manage, and she asked clearly and without apology for the ones she couldn't. She had a way of saying, "I need you to hold this," that was completely free of anything except the practical reality that she needed me to hold something. No softness, no gratitude performance, just the work. She reorganized my plan for the shelving without asking. I had drawn up a simple grid, functional, efficient, boring. She looked at it, pulled a pencil from behind her ear, and redrew the lower sections at an angle so browsers could see spine and cover at the same time. She adjusted the spacing based on standard hardcover and paperback dimensions that she apparently had memorized. When I pointed out that angled shelves would require more complex bracket work, she said, "You're a furniture restorer who turned a rocking chair into a plant stand. I think you can handle a 15-degree angle." She was right, and she knew she was right. And there was something in the way she knew it that made me want to build the best shelves I had ever built. One afternoon, we were carrying one of the oak tables outside to strip it, and the leg caught on the door frame, and we spent 5 minutes maneuvering it through an opening that was about 2 inches too narrow. And at some point our arms were tangled, and the table was at an angle that defied geometry, and she started laughing. Not polite laughing, real laughing, the kind that makes your shoulders shake and your grip go weak. Which was a problem because she was holding one end of a 60-pound table. "Do not drop that," I said. "I'm trying, it's just your face. My face is concentrating. Your face looks like you're trying to do long division." We got the table outside. She sat on the curb and caught her breath, and I stood there with sawdust on my arms, looking at her. And something in my chest shifted like a joint that had been glued crooked for years and was finally settling into the place it was always supposed to be. I didn't say anything. I went back inside and started on the next shelf. In the evenings, we still ate at May's, same stools, same counter. But the conversation had changed in the way that conversations change when people have spent 8 hours in the same room and run out of small talk and have to start using the real stuff. She told me about her Aunt Margaret, who had opened the bookshop in 1994 with 300 books and a coffee pot, and had grown it into the kind of place where people drove 40 minutes just to sit and think and stay longer than they'd planned. Margaret had died 2 years ago. Nora had been in Knoxville, working at a job she described only as the kind that pays your rent and takes everything else. One evening over pie, I asked her, "Why didn't you come sooner? After she passed?" Nora stirred her coffee. The spoon went around 3 times, slowly, each circuit a little wider than the last. "I was with someone. He didn't think Harlan was a serious plan. He thought I should sell the building and invest the money in something that made sense. Something with a return." "And you didn't sell?" "I didn't. And eventually he decided that I wasn't a serious investment either." She said it flat, like a weather report. Overcast today with a chance of nothing. I recognized the tone. It was the same one I used when people asked about Caroline. The tone that means the wound is closed over, but you can still feel exactly where it was if you press on it. So you've trained yourself not to press. That night I drove home and sat in my kitchen and looked at the second chair at my table, the one that had been holding a stack of mail and a newspaper from 3 weeks ago since the day Caroline drove away. I moved the mail. I moved the newspaper. I wiped the seat down with a damp cloth. I didn't put anything back on it. 3 weeks into the renovation, on a Thursday evening in early November, we were working late. The overhead lights in the shop were the only ones left on the whole block. Rain was tapping against the front windows in a way that made the inside feel smaller and warmer. Nora was sitting on the floor surrounded by her aunt's old ledgers, and I was hand-sanding the last of the replacement shelf boards, and the radio was playing something quiet that neither of us was listening to. She wrote notes next to every sale, Nora said. Her voice was low, almost to herself. Not just the title. She'd write things like, "For the woman whose husband forgets to ask how she is," or "For the boy who sits alone at lunch and pretends he likes it." She was prescribing books, Dean, like medicine. She saw people and she knew what they were missing. I put down the sanding block. Nora was holding one of the ledgers open on her lap, her thumb pressed against a page that had gone yellow and water-spotted at the edges. Her face had the look of someone revisiting a room they used to live in and finding that all the furniture has been moved. My aunt was the only person in my life who ever looked at me and saw what I actually needed instead of what I could do for them, she said. When she died, I stayed in Knoxville for 2 more years because I was afraid that if I came here and opened this door and she wasn't behind the counter, it would make it final. Really final. The kind of final you can't undo by pretending you'll visit next month. She closed the ledger and held it against her chest. And then I stayed even longer because Ryan, my ex, he was very good at explaining why my feelings about a dead woman's bookshop were sentimental and impractical. He had spreadsheets. He had projections. He had this way of talking about my grief like it was a business problem he could optimize me out of. And I believed him. For a while, I believed him, because it was easier than believing myself. She set the ledger down carefully on the floor beside her, lining it up with the others. Then one morning, I woke up and realized I had become the kind of person who asks permission to feel things. So I got in my car, and I drove here, and I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. I didn't even pack properly. That's why the strap on my bag is broken. I shoved everything I cared about into it in 20 minutes, and the zipper gave out on the highway outside of Corbin. I was quiet. The rain filled the silence between us, which was what the silence needed. Not words, not comfort, just something to hold its shape while it sat there. Caroline, the woman I was with, she said something to me once, I said. I hadn't planned to say this. The words came out the way a nail works loose from old wood, slowly at first, with resistance, and then all at once. She said she'd been sitting in my house for 14 months, and she still didn't know if I'd notice if she left. I told her I would notice. She asked why I never acted like it. And I sat there in that parking lot, and I watched her drive away, and I didn't say a single thing that mattered. Not one word. Nora looked at me across the shop floor, between the half-restored shelves and the sawdust and the scattered ledgers. Why not? Because I was so used to sitting still that I forgot people need you to move. She didn't say anything comforting. She didn't tell me it wasn't my fault, or that I'd do better next time, or that Caroline would understand someday. She just held my gaze for a long moment, steady and clear, and then nodded once, like I had said something she already knew from the inside of her own chest. Then she reached across the space between us and put her hand on top of mine. Briefly, lightly, the way you'd touch a surface to check if the finish was dry. Just enough to know. And then she pulled her hand back and went back to reading her aunt's ledgers, and I went back to sanding, and neither of us said anything else that night. And that was exactly right. After that evening, something was different, and we both knew it, and neither of us named it. We worked side by side every afternoon and ate dinner every evening and talked about the building and about wood species and about May's increasingly unsubtle comments about how nice it was that Dean finally had company at the counter. We didn't talk about the thing underneath all of it, because talking about it would have meant deciding what to do with it. And neither of us was ready to make a decision that big out loud. So it sat between us, present, patient, like a chair in the room that both people can see and neither one will sit in. The building was coming together. The floors were repaired. The shelves were rebuilt, walnut to match the originals, because Nora wouldn't consider anything less, and I wouldn't have let her. The 4 oak tables were stripped and refinished and placed near the front windows where the morning light would warm them. I built a counter for the back wall from reclaimed barn wood that Nora found at an estate sale 3 counties over, driving back with it strapped to the roof of her car in a way that made me close my eyes when she described it. When the counter was installed, she ran her hand along its surface the way I run my hand along a finished piece, slowly, feeling for anything that isn't right. Then she said, "Margaret would have approved." And the way she said it told me that was the highest compliment she knew how to give. Then in the second week of November, a man walked into the building while I was up on a ladder replacing a ceiling fixture, and Nora was at the counter sorting books she'd been ordering from wholesalers, arranging them into categories that only made sense to her and to the ghost of her aunt. He was tall, clean-shaven, wearing a coat that cost more than my truck payment and shoes that had never been inside a building with sawdust on the floor. He stood in the doorway and looked around the shop the way you look at a child's drawing on a refrigerator, with an expression that wants to seem charmed but has already decided the whole thing is temporary. "So, this is the plan," he said. Nora's whole body went still. Not frozen, still. the way wood goes still when you clamp it, holding all its tension inward where you can't see it. "Ryan," she said, "your mother told me where you were." "She's worried, Nora. We're all worried." I didn't ask anyone to worry. He walked further into the shop, running a finger along one of the shelves I'd finished 2 days before. I could see the pad of his finger testing the surface, checking for dust, for imperfection, for evidence that this wasn't serious. It's charming, really, the whole small town thing. But you've been here for 6 weeks now, and I think you've made your point. I haven't made a point. I've made a bookshop. He smiled the way people smile when they've already decided how the conversation is going to end. I stayed on the ladder. I didn't like him. I knew the shape of him. I had stripped the ruined finish off 100 pieces of furniture that people like him had thrown out because they couldn't see the value in something that wasn't new and gleaming and easy to explain at a dinner party. "Nora, come on. You've got no business experience. You've got a building that's, 70 years old? In a town that's losing population? The roof alone is going to cost more than whatever you've got saved. This is a project, and I respect that you needed to get it out of your system, but get it out of my system." She repeated his words back to him in a tone so level you could have used it to true a shelf. "Like a cold, like a phase, like grief," he said, and his voice dropped into something softer, something designed to sound like tenderness, but that landed the way a hand lands on a shoulder when it's pressing you back into a chair you're trying to stand up from. Margaret died, and you're hurting, and you came here because this place reminds you of her. I understand that. But you can't build a life on sentiment. You know that. I came down the ladder. I didn't decide to. My boots were on the rungs, and then they were on the floor, the same way my mouth had moved that first night at the counter. Not because I chose it, but because something in me recognized that standing above a moment like this was wrong. I set my drill on the counter and stood where I was standing, which happened to be about 4 feet from Nora and directly in Ryan's sight line. He looked at me for the first time, took in the sawdust on my shirt, the work boots, the measuring tape clipped to my belt, the calluses. He looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture that came with a room you're planning to renovate. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" "He's the person who actually showed up," Nora said. She said it before I could open my mouth, and the words landed in the room the way a deadbolt sounds when it slides home. She stepped out from behind the counter and stood beside me. Not behind me, beside me. Close enough that our shoulders nearly touched, which was a choice she made with her body that said more than any sentence could have. "You told me for 2 years that this was a fantasy," she said to Ryan. Her voice was quiet and unhurried, and every word had the weight of something she'd been carrying alone for a long time, and had only just now decided to set down on the floor. "You told me my aunt's shop was a sentimental attachment I needed to let go of. You told me selling the building was the smart move. You told me what I felt didn't make financial sense, as if feelings were supposed to. And I believed you. I believed you because I was grieving and exhausted, and you were very, very confident. But I am standing in this building right now, Ryan. The shelves are walnut. The floors are solid. The counter is built from wood that's older than either of us. And I did this. Not you, not your projections, not your spreadsheets. Me and the people who cared enough to help without needing a reason that fit on a balance sheet." Ryan looked from her to me and back. His composure shifted, the confidence thinning at the edges the way veneer lifts when the glue underneath has finally failed. "I came here to help you, Nora. No. You came here to collect me. There's a difference, and it's the reason I left." He stood there for another moment, his hand still resting on my shelf, and I watched him realize that he had walked into a room where he had no leverage and no audience willing to pretend he did. Then he turned and left. The door swung shut. The bell above it rang once, high and clear, and settled. Nora's hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against the barnwood counter I'd built and took one slow breath, then another. I didn't touch her. I didn't say a word. I just stood where I was, close enough that she could feel I was there, far enough that she had all the room she needed. After a minute, she said, "I need some air," and walked out the back door into the alley. I heard her boots on the gravel, then nothing. I stayed in the shop. I picked up the sanding block and worked on a shelf edge that was already smooth. Sometimes your hands need to be doing something so the rest of you can think. May called me that night. She almost never called. May believed phones were for emergencies and bad news, and she wasn't wrong about either. "That girl came into the diner at 9 and she'd been crying," May said. "She told me she was fine, and I didn't believe her, and neither should you. Whatever that man said to her today, it wasn't the first time she's heard it. Go check on her, Dean. And this time, for the love of God, don't tell her the seat's taken." I drove to the motel on Route 38. Her light was on. Room 6, ground floor, the one with the curtain that didn't close all the way. I sat in my truck for 5 minutes with the engine running and the heater on, trying to find the right words, trying to assemble something that wouldn't sound like all the useless things people say when they don't know what to actually do. I couldn't find them. So I turned the engine off and knocked on her door with nothing prepared and everything I had. She opened it. Her eyes were red. Her hair was down, loose around her shoulders, longer than I'd realized. She was wearing a flannel shirt 3 sizes too big. Sleeves rolled past her wrists, and she looked at me like she'd been expecting me, and also like she'd been expecting me not to come. And both of those things were true at the same time. "I'm sorry," I said. I should have said something while he was standing there. I should have told him to leave the second he walked in. "You came down from the ladder. That was enough." It wasn't. I stood there like a piece of furniture. "Dean." She almost smiled. "You are the least furniture-like person I have ever met. You built me a counter from a barn. You rebuilt my aunt's shelves. You showed up every single afternoon without me ever asking you to keep coming back. You just kept coming. You asked me to. The first night. You said, 'Same time tomorrow.' And you said yes. Every time. Do you understand how rare that is? Someone who just keeps showing up without turning it into a transaction." We stood there, her in the doorway, and me on the concrete step. And the parking lot was quiet, and the highway was a low hum in the distance, and something inside my chest that had been clamped shut for 2 years released, not breaking, not snapping, but releasing, the way a clamp loosens from a joint that is finally set. "I need to tell you something," I said. "And I'm going to say it badly, because I don't have any practice at this. But Caroline left because I never said what mattered when it mattered. I let her walk away holding a bag of oranges, and I didn't say one true thing. And I have spent the last 2 years restoring other people's broken chairs while my own life sat in a corner collecting dust. I am not going to do that again. Not with you. Dean, that first night you walked into May's, I told you the seat was taken because I was afraid. Not of you. Of what it would mean if someone sat there and I started counting on it. I have been saving that seat every night since, and I need you to know it isn't habit. It's because the room changed when you walked in. I changed. I started wanting to show up earlier, I started checking the clock at 4:30. I started building shelves like they were the most important thing I'd ever build. And they are, because they're yours. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. She looked at me for a long time. The motel sign buzzed and flickered behind me, casting a yellow glow that came and went. "You are really slow, Dean," she said. "I know. I have been waiting for you to say something, anything, since the night you told me about Caroline in the shop. I almost said it myself 6 different times. After the table got stuck in the doorway. After you built the counter and I saw your hands shaking because you wanted it to be perfect. After May told me you'd been leaving bigger tips ever since I started sitting next to you. Like you were thanking her for something she hadn't done. But I needed you to choose it. I needed it to be a choice you made. Not something you fell into because I was already sitting beside you." "It's a choice," I said. "It's the first real one I've made in 3 years." She reached out and took the front of my jacket in both hands and pulled me toward her and kissed me. It was warm and unsteady and tasted like the gas station coffee she drank too much of and the rain that had started up again somewhere out beyond the parking lot lights. It felt like setting the last joint in a frame that had been waiting a long time to hold together. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against mine and said, "The seat's not taken anymore, Dean. It's yours and it's mine. That's the end of that particular argument." I stayed. Not at the motel that night. I drove home eventually, through rain that had softened into mist, with the wipers off and the radio off, and a feeling in my chest like a house with every window lit for the first time in years. But I stayed in the way that mattered. I kept showing up. 7 months later, the bookshop opened. Nora put a sign above the door that read, "Margaret's," in hand-painted letters, dark green on cream, with a small line underneath. "A book for what you're missing." The counter I'd built was stacked with paperbacks, arranged not by genre or author, but by what Nora thought people needed. A shelf labeled, "When you can't sleep." Another for when someone left. Another for when you need to laugh until your face hurts. She had learned that trick from the ledgers, and she was already getting it right on the first try, the way her aunt had. People would walk in looking lost and walk out holding a book they didn't know they needed, and Nora would watch them go with a quiet look on her face that I had come to recognize as the expression of someone doing exactly what they were built to do. On opening day, May closed the diner for an hour and walked the whole staff down 2nd Street and bought 4 books and 2 cups of the coffee Nora had started brewing at the back counter. May stood in the middle of the shop and turned slowly, taking in the shelves and the light coming through the windows and the oak tables where people were already sitting with their pages open. And she said to me, quiet enough that only I heard, "Your mother would have loved her, Dean. And she'd have been so proud of you for finally getting out of your own stubborn way." My throat closed. I didn't answer. May patted my arm once and went to browse the shelf marked, "When you miss someone." By spring, Nora had moved into my house. The second chair at my kitchen table held a person instead of old mail. She put a small shelf by the front door for her boots and a hook for her jacket, and a stack of books on the nightstand that grew taller every week and occasionally toppled over at 3 in the morning, which she blamed on the cat we'd somehow acquired, a gray tabby that had walked into the bookshop one afternoon and refused to leave, which Nora said was proof that Margaret was still prescribing things from wherever she was. She reorganized my kitchen without asking permission, and I let her because she was right about where the mugs should go. She was right about most things. The times she wasn't. She admitted it with the same flat directness she used for everything else, which made me trust her even more. On warm evenings, we sit on the porch out back. My house doesn't have a proper porch. It's a concrete slab with 2 chairs I restored from a church basement, reupholstered in fabric Nora picked, dark blue with small white flowers that remind me of nothing in particular and everything at once. We drink coffee from mismatched mugs and watch the road and talk about the shop, or about a piece of furniture I'm working on, or about nothing, and both are fine. The quiet between us isn't empty anymore. It's full. It's the kind of quiet that happens when 2 people don't need to speak to know the other one is there. I still go to May's most evenings. But now there are 2 cups behind the counter, my blue one with the chipped rim and a white one May bought the week Nora started sitting beside me. May has never explained why she bought it. She has never needed to. Last week I was in my shop finishing a ladder-back chair, an old one, solid maple, that someone's kid had jumped on until the rear legs splayed out and 2 spindles cracked clean through. I spent 4 days steaming the joints back into alignment, replacing the spindles, sanding the seat until it was smooth enough that you'd never know it had been anything other than whole. When it was done, I set it on the shop floor and sat in it, and it held me. It was solid. It was better than it had been before the damage, because now it had been cared for by someone who understood exactly what had gone wrong and took the time to make it right. Nora came in carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She saw me sitting in the finished chair and leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed and her ponytail coming loose and one eyebrow raised in that way she has that makes me feel like the most transparent person who has ever lived. "You're sitting in the merchandise," she said. "I'm quality testing." "You've been done with that chair since yesterday." She was right. I had been done since yesterday. I was sitting in it because the feeling of something damaged becoming solid again is something I will never get tired of. And because the shop was warm, and the light was good, and the woman I loved was standing in my doorway holding coffee she'd made for me without being asked, looking at me like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I had once believed that the quietest life was the safest one. That if I just stayed still enough, in the same seat, at the same counter, doing the same careful work, nothing else I cared about would break. But Nora walked in from the rain and asked me to save her a seat. And by doing so, she taught me the one thing that all my years of restoring broken chairs had never made clear. A seat you refuse to offer anyone isn't being saved. It's just empty. And the bravest thing an ordinary man can do with an empty chair is let someone sit down in it and trust that this time, when morning comes, they'll still be there.